All right, welcome. My name is Andrea Edwards, and today we're going to be doing a special edition where we're going to be talking about Australia's referendum, The Voice, or what's it all about. I'm going to bring Cymbeline in now. So we had some problems with connection, and StreamYard set up the wrong time. But anyway, I'm an Australian living outside of Australia, so I'm obviously getting a perspective of what's going on, but I'm not getting the whole perspective, and I'm not sitting in the middle of the fight, because it is a fight, unfortunately. But I've got to say, it's a bit confusing what's going on, and I am surprised by all of the rage and anger. So I thought, what better way to do this than to invite three fabulous people in my life who are all doing the work to understand not just their opinion, but other people's opinions. And just to really clarify it, mainly for the Australians who are living overseas, but as well as there's a lot of people outside of Australia who will be looking, going, what the hell's going on over there, you know? So one of my friends in Singapore thought we were talking about The Voice, the singing competition, when we talked about it recently. Anyway, welcome to Willie Wallen.
Hello.
Cymbeline King. I nearly called you your old surname.
Hello.
And another of my favourite humans, Gavin Waring. Welcome.
All
right. G'day, mate. So just to kick off, I just figured a really good thing to start would be just to give everyone a sense of who you guys are, what you do, what you care about. Who wants to start? Willie, do you want to go first?
Sure thing. Yep. Hi, my name's Willie, and I'm a design strategist, which means that I work to help people solve problems strategically using design methods. And I work for an impact-driven agency called Portable, and we work a lot in the mental health sector. We work with Indigenous agencies. We work in the justice sector, and we have a lot to say about working with people with lived experience, which is what I want to talk about today and why it's important for The Voice. So it's a little bit about me.
Cool. Cymbeline?
Yeah, so my name is Cymbeline King, or Cymbeline Beulah King. Sometimes I go by either. I work for Blue Mountain City Council for a branch of Blue Mountain City Council called Planetary Health, the Planetary Health Initiative. And I'm working on a project which is about disaster risk reduction, trying to look at things like water management and community cohesion to reduce the impact of fires, floods, heat waves, that sort of thing. And I recently finished a PhD in social sciences at University of Western Sydney. And I live in a thank you. And I am very involved in the Yes campaign for The Voice. I've been absolutely glued to it. So I have perspective to bring to it. To this
Yeah, all right. I didn't know about the doctorate. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Dr. Sim.
Thank you. Not quite doctor yet.
All right. Okay. I'm going to have to get you on a
coming.
climate courage. Because the whole social cohesion piece is so important, right? So, Gav.
Absolutely.
The great Gav.
I don't know about the great part.
Oh, I think you are.
Gavin Waring. I live in Newtown in the inner west of Sydney. I'm a senior optical fibre technician. Pretty much that explains it. We join optical fibres and test them. I've been a comms tech for over 20 years. And I had a lot of negative experiences with First Nations people when I was growing up in the country, when I was a young guy, and never quite understood where the anger came from or why it was directed at me. But then as you grow up and have lots of life experiences and meet different people and educate yourself, really, it sort of came to understand where all that came from. And then, it's at the pointy end now with something like The Voice. And yes, I've been very interested in it, and ultimately hope it gets up, and think it will.
Yeah, oh, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, and I think that point of growing up in the country, I think that's a really important point, because I grew up in the country as well. Did you guys, Tim? I'm just going to mute you, so if you want to speak, unmute. But just to stop that beeping sound. But did you guys grow up in the country or in cities?
In the country.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
Yep.
Sim, did you grow up in the country or in a city?
Blue Mountains, so just out of the city. So kind
Yeah,
of
right.
in between the country and the city.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, because when I moved to the cities, I found, the First Nations people were very separate to us in different suburbs where you wouldn't even see somebody in a day or in a week. Whereas when you grew up, there was a very different thing. So yeah, that's a really good point, Gab. Sorry, Willie?
No, I was just going to add to that I actually live in a regional part of New South Wales now, and it's national voting territory, and we've had things in our letterbox here, and it's pretty interesting. I think regional Australia is quite different to the cities, and I think it's good to be out in regional Australia and there's some amazing people out here doing amazing work, but you're not in your little echo chamber. And I think that it's really good, because you have to learn to be diplomatic. And I think that diplomacy is really what's missing a lot from this whole thing, like the art of diplomacy.
Yeah. Worldwide, right? All right. So just for the people who think that The Voice is about singing competition or talent competition, and of course for the Australians like myself who are living out of Australia, Gav, do you want to kick us off just sort of giving us an explanation of what The Voice is and why it's important?
Okay, well, I'm no politician or wordsmith, but as I understand it, it's recognising First Nations people in our constitution as the original inhabitants, and also it's what it says. It's going to give them a voice via a committee to advise government on issues that affect them, and that's it. At the end of the day, the government still gets the final say. Yeah. It's not an overarching, this is what's going to happen. It's just an advisory body. That's all it is. So that's it.
And that's all been confused. But I just thought, it would be important to go back. Australia has never recognised the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in its constitution, which is considered to be unusual. All of the settler nations have recognised their Indigenous community. So Australia is the only one. And it's also never recognised this community in the constitution. And they weren't fully counted in the population until 1971. And there are no dedicated seats for them in government. In 1962, they were finally granted the right to vote. And you've got to remember, they fought in World War I, World War II. They were active citizens in our nations. But the calls for self-determination go back for generations. Anyone who's aware, there's been a lot of, it's, you kind of think back to what we as a society have done to this community, the stolen generation, just healthcare, the amount of people who are incarcerated, mental health issues, all of it. We have never done a great job by these people. So this is important, that they basically just get recognition within the constitution, which means no future governments can undo it. So, if you look into it, to me, it just, there's no argument that this is, it might not be the final steps that we need to take, but it's a right step in the right direction, and overcoming some of the harm we've done, but we've got a lot of work to do there. Willie?
I want to add something that's really important to what the referendum's about. Bodies like what The Voice will be have existed before in different forms. It's not actually something new as such, but what this does is ensure its place that can't be moved by different governments. So if you have ATSIC, for example, which was the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, I can't remember the rest of the acronyms, which is terrible, but the ATSIC was around for a few years, and then a government decides we're not going to fund that anymore. So then off ATSIC goes. And then, another government comes in and says, we need a representative body for Indigenous Australians. Okay, let's create another body. So what the Constitution does is guarantee that body. It's not actually something that sits outside of government or can dictate the terms of government or, and it's not, I think a lot of the misnomer around the actual referendum itself, what people are actually voting on, is around this thing, well, give us the details and give us the stuff. It's like, no, there aren't any details yet, because that's where legislation comes in.
Yeah.
So the legislation decides how it gets funded and how it gets, how it gets actually incorporated into the machinations of government. But the actual vote is something quite different. And I think that's where a lot of people are getting confused. So we don't have all the information on the details, because there isn't any detail. That gets decided by Parliament. And like everything gets decided by Parliament, that's nothing new either. So this idea that it's some kind of, brand new thing as a body is actually not quite true. It's not true at all. And the other part of it, that we don't have any detail, so therefore it's divisive and scary, is also based, well, you might as well say that all of the legislation that happens in our country is divisive and scary, because that's what legislation's there to govern. So I find those points to be really, really important for people to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Sim?
Can I add one thing also to why it's so important? What it's really about, which is that our First Nations people have so many policies made that impact them, policies that are specific to them. And in fact, I think one example that's a really great example is the Northern Territory intervention, which was led by John Howard. And that intervention actually had a lot of First Nations leaders calling for it. There were big problems. There were big problems in the Northern Territory that the intervention attempted to address, attempted to solve. And actually, the way that intervention got done was not in consultation with Indigenous people. It was done in this way that was sort of top heavy, imposed by the government of the day, which is, primarily white people, without that consultation. And the damage that it did was extraordinary. And the gap between, the gap, which is the gap in life expectancy and life circumstances between Aboriginal people and the rest of Australian society, did not reduce in any way. It hasn't been closed. The intervention failed to address any of the big problems. And there's an example of policy that actually should have had Indigenous input. That's the sort of thing where there's policy that's needed to address big problems, and we've seen again and again. We could list 1,000 examples of policies that are made to address problems that exist that fail, and so this voice is really a different way of doing things, where the people who are impacted by those policies get to actually have a say, get to actually inform those policies. And we know that those policies are needed because there exists, a big gap between the whole rest of the Australian society and our First Nations people.
Yeah, absolutely. Should be involved. All right. So, Willie, we know that representation matters. It's a key topic in many, many, many areas. So why is representation important, especially for traumatised communities? And what do people with lived experience of an issue bring to the table at a national policy level?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of things to unpack in all of those areas. And the first one is representation. If you have an issue and no one is giving you a platform to speak about that issue, and no one is giving you an avenue to work with others to sort that issue out, then you're not represented. And so our government is representative, but there are lots of people in our society who don't have channels towards that representation. Now, an argument around this is that, well, why should Indigenous Australians be represented in the Parliament any more than anybody else? And I think that what Cymbeline was saying before about, the amount of policies that are made for First Nations people in Australia speaks to that. I think that answers that. So representation is incredibly important. lived experience and trauma are something that's really quite different. And when you're talking about traumatized, you're talking about intergenerational trauma, which we know First Nations people have. They will tell you that themselves. And I don't want to stand here and speak for First Nations people at all. And I'm not here to do that, but the intergenerational trauma is real, from the stolen generations to even today, people are being displaced within our own country. And so that trauma is very real, and trauma-informed brains actually develop differently to brains that don't have trauma as they develop. And that's a physiological thing that happens with our brains. So the expectation that some people in the community, well, there's the starting line over here, and we're all going to start at the same starting line with all the same resources and all the same access to power and all of those things. Okay, 1, 2, 3, go. And the gun goes off. And everyone's super surprised when somebody who grows up with trauma, grows up to intergenerational and complex trauma, doesn't get to the start at the same time. They don't have running shoes. They don't, oh no, they've only got one leg. This is metaphorically speaking. All of these things actually create disadvantage, massive disadvantage. And so there's this idea that people who are being represented seemingly unfairly in a system because we're all starting at the same starting block, well, that's unfair. It's like, first and foremost, it's not the same starting block at all. And so that's really important too. So let's put something in there that puts us at the same starting block a little bit more. And that's what I think the voice is really important to. But, you know, as I mentioned before, I work as a designer and I work in design strategy, and we work with a lot of traumatized communities. We work with, you know, I've just come off the back of a really huge project that has talked to parents, teachers, and students all over the state of New South Wales about anxiety post-COVID. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on out there for people. We can't solve any problems unless we talk to the people who are having the problem. So lived experience is really important. And when you come into areas like co-design, for example, and a lot of governments are wanting to do co-design because they understand the value of co-design to actually creating policies that will have a significantly better impact on the communities that it's designed for, because it's being designed by community for community. And so co-design elevates lived experience to the same level of professional expertise. And that's a really significant mind shift in how we approach problem solving. And I think that that's what's not really being done. It's sort of piecemeal being done until now. But what the voice represents is this shift towards involving communities a lot more in policy formation. And I think that when you're talking about the most disadvantaged communities, yes, put them at that starting block. Let's give them what they need to get to the starting block. Stop blaming people for things that they can't do because they haven't had the same advantage. They don't have the same access to power, and they don't have the same starting block. I think that's what is really important about honouring lived experience.
Yeah. Nice one. Oh, I could talk to you for hours about this. You guys got any comment? No, just, I mean, get the people involved in solving their own problems, right? Rather than dictating it. You know, the amount of the white man solutions that we all grew up with haven't worked. All right.
Yeah, I mean, it's they're okay. They're okay, little children. Here's what I'm going to do for you.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And I mean, as women, we get it. You know,
Yeah.
other people.
Yeah.
Get it, you know? I mean, there are all sorts of groups that get told, there, little one, I'll sort that out for you. It's like, no, we can sort stuff out for ourselves. That's fine. Give us the levers, give us the access to power, give us the resources, and give us the floor to speak of our experiences. And I think that's what has been so desperately missing in so many of the policies that, I mean, Cymbeline was mentioning as well.
Now, I know Gav hasn't got all a whole bunch of time, so he's going to have to leave us. I think, you got an engagement party to organise or something. But you know, when this all first started, I actually was not expecting it to turn into such a divisive and ugly fight. You know, the last election in Australia, I thought, finally feels like Australia is sort of growing up and moving beyond the division that we're seeing all around the world on all sorts of different issues, right? But so it's been a bit, I suppose, it's been a bit disappointing for me. But I just, constantly think we've done so poorly by our First Nations people. It's time to make a move in the right direction. This feels like the right direction. It's not going to harm anyone. It's going to help them. It's not going to harm us. We're hearing people say, oh, they're going to have more rights. It's like, what are you talking about? What are you guys saying? I mean, Gav, maybe you want to kick off, but what are you seeing as the key drivers in the division that we're seeing out there?
There's a couple of different points of view on that division topic you're talking about. So I'll talk about the LNP, which is the Liberal National Party, which is the opposition party over here, the Conservatives in Australia. I was listening to Christopher Pyne, who's an ex-Conservative MP, and Emerson, a guy called Emerson, who's a ex-Labor MP, and they were both saying how on pretty much every concept of the voice that Labor's put forward, the opposition agrees. The only point that Peter Dutton disagrees on is that he can't, when he gets in government, take that straight out again. Like I think it was Willie was saying before, just turn these things on and off at the whim of the government of the day, right? It's pretty much the only sticking point these guys have. So that's been a point of, and they've used that. That's their thing, right? So they're going to that, and just you can see all the negativity that's coming up surrounding that. And a lot of it is also, I think, part of it is that the opposite. It's when you come to something like this, and the no side's got a very easy job to do, and they've encapsulated it in a slogan which is, if you don't know, vote no.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if you've heard that online.
Yeah.
That's the mantra. If you don't know, vote no. Right.
Yeah.
But that grabs. The Yes campaign is much more complex and is yet to come up with, for want of a better word, and I hate saying this, but a slogan that you can really grab onto. Okay, it just hasn't, and I think for the people who are in that, I don't know, so I'm going to vote no camp, they really do need to be spoon-fed some sort of slogan that's going to get them over the line on the Yes side. The other thing on that matter is that I've been finding quite funny, and if you don't know, you can find out and about it. It took me. I was driving up the coast a few weeks ago with my 15-year-old daughter, and part of the conversation, we have chats on the road, and she said to me, "Oh, Dad, what's the go with the Yes thing? She didn't even know that the Yes vote and the Voice campaign were the same thing. She thought the referendum was a different thing altogether." So anyway, I explained it to her, and a 15-year-old girl who's quite intelligent, but she got that. The conversation went from A to B, and when I finished speaking, she said, "No, that makes sense. I understand it." And I remember looking at the clock, and it took me 11 minutes to explain that to a 15-year-old, person. Surely anyone could take 10 minutes and Google what is the voice. I mean, it was summed up in that Briggs, that Briggs.
Yeah. That was a good little video. Yeah.
So I think it's absolutely brilliant, right?
Yeah.
But they still have to make that message, as good as that message is from Briggs, they still have to make that even shorter, because that still can't compete with, if you don't know, vote no.
Oh, Clinton's come up with a suggestion. If you have to guess, vote yes.
I love it.
But
yeah.
For me, the whole vote no, if you don't know, vote no is just like, great, encouraging our citizens to be ignorant. Yeah, that's the sort of politicians we want, right? So
willful ignorance. Yeah, it's not the done thing. It's not right. It's also, I think, and I'm going to go down a limb here. It's also why I don't believe that Australians, or anyone for that matter, is that stupid. Yeah. And worn out. You have a Yes rally in Sydney. I can only speak for the rally in Sydney because it's the one I was at. There's about 15,000 plus people there in the stinking heat, right? And we marched for a couple of Ks. And then there was a great big get together in the park down here with bands and all the rest of it. The No campaign can muster, a couple of hundred people? And then the Nazis turn up at rallies?
Yeah.
The Nazis wearing T-shirts saying "lynch journalists."
Yeah.
And again, I referenced that video from that lady that's been going around. I forget her name, but look at, if you've got a decision to make, look what side the Nazis are on.
Yeah.
What's that say?
Yeah, exactly. I thought that was very good. If the Nazis are on that side, probably you shouldn't be.
Probably not a good idea to be on that side. And things, they're in the minority, but they're very, very loud, and they're very effective, right? And
yeah. I being in a Nationals voting territory too. Sorry, Sim. We received, the David Gillespie, who is my local member. We received that in the post, and that slogan is what got me so mad. I rang his office and I said to the lady on the phone, "I'm not mad at you, but I am mad as hell that you treat voters in this way. It's lazy. It's a lazy and abusive use of that office. It's our office, actually. We pay all of your wages." I didn't say that to her, but this is my point. If you're going to be in office and you have that access to power, how lazy is it to say, if you don't know, you just vote no. That's going to be right. Well, no, that's not democracy. That is the opposite of democracy. And I call on people to throw away the slogan. If you don't know, as Briggs says, Google it.
If you don't know, do the bloody work, right? We like having bloody in our things. But Willie, can you just explain what the National Party is for people who might not understand?
Yeah, okay, so Gavin mentioned the LNP. So the Liberal National Party is actually two parties. So the Nationals are traditionally in the country. There is Country Liberal and Country Labor as well, but the Nationals and the Liberals have had a cosy little relationship for quite a long time. They're also kind of at loggerheads sometimes with each other. But where I live, in my electorate and the electorate just north of me, it's a very stronghold Nationals area. So it's quite interesting in that respect. And it almost, the electorate just north of me almost got usurped by Teals in the last election, which, for everybody who doesn't know, the Teal independent movement happened in the last election. But so they're quite a conservative party. Conservative, I would say, even sometimes beyond the Liberal Party, and that gets confusing for my American friends because they're liberal. No, they're not. They're not liberal in that sense. They're a conservative party. So I would say that the Nationals sometimes push the envelope in very bizarre ways on issues like this. And I think that slogan in my mailbox to me was just like, that's when I will pick up the phone and I'll give you what for, because it's an undermining of the democratic processes at the taxpayer's expense in the worst possible way.
And aren't they not supposed to do that? Because it's not, isn't that supposed
they
to
are
be
campaigning. They're allowed to campaign on this as parties. I think it's important to differentiate between some of the different no campaigners, because there are two broad spheres of no campaigners, and one is the conservative no, and that is the Liberal Party, which is Peter Dutton is the leader of the Liberal Party, and the Nationals. So they're a coalition, but they are two separate parties. And the Nationals actually said that as a party, they were going to vote no. They were going to endorse the no vote, even before the whole thing began, at the very beginning, before the whole campaign began. And so put together those two, we can call them the conservative no. And there is another no campaign, which has labelled itself the progressive no. And I think just to give a little sketch of what each of those two things are, with the conservative no, that is really spearheaded by Peter Dutton. And Peter Dutton became the leader of the Liberal Party in the last election because it was an absolute landslide. The LNP was absolutely hammered. Labor got into power, and there was a big swing against the Conservatives from the teal independents that Willie just mentioned. And the teals are conservative. They are, fiscally conservative, but socially progressive. And they really said, no, we do not want a hard right, conservative, scare campaign, reactionary government. And there was a huge vote against that kind of extreme hard right politics in Australia. And that's what we saw in the election. On election night, Anthony Albanese, the first thing he said in his victory speech was that we were going to endorse the Uluru Statement from the Heart and go to a referendum for the voice. So he really nailed his prime ministership to this referendum in a way that was just wonderful. I mean, the sense of celebration, and this is what Gav, I think, was talking about with those yes marches. There is such a sense of celebration among the yes voters. There's a sense of the time has come. This is just wonderful. There's such a groundswell behind the yes campaign. And Peter Dutton decided not to offer bipartisanship on this. He decided to say no. He was going to not only endorse a no vote, but actually campaign for it. And so it was a very targeted politicisation of this referendum. There was no reason for this referendum to be the fight that it is. It actually should have been bipartisan because, as Willie said, Gav said, I think that the two sides of politics support all of the elements of this. In fact, every piece, separately they support. In fact, Peter Dutton recently said he would go to a referendum for constitutional recognition, and he would legislate a voice. So that is the conservative side of the conservative no, and some people call it the racist no. But the other thing just to say about that, because this is confusing, is that Peter Dutton has put in place some very high-profile Indigenous politicians who speak from a middle class Indigenous perspective, and they say, no, actually, we don't have disadvantage in our community. No, actually, this would entrench disadvantage in Aboriginal communities. And there's no reason that it would. There's no reason that it would entrench disadvantage. It would address disadvantage, and if there was no disadvantage left, if it could address disadvantage, there would still be a reason to have a voice, because we have the oldest living culture in the world. Australia is actually Aboriginal land. It always has been, and it always will be. And so, of course, we should have a voice from our First Nations people. So that's really the conservative no in a nutshell. And the progressive no is important to acknowledge because it comes from an Indigenous groundswell, and it comes from a movement called the Black Sovereignty Movement. And most people, I think, might know of the Black Sovereignty Movement through the Aboriginal Tent Embassy, which has been going since, I think, the 70s. But it's a very established, long-running Indigenous movement. And I think that that notion, always has been, always will be, Aboriginal land is kind of central to what the Black Sovereignty Movement is. I'm not in a position to speak for them, but my understanding of it really is about, this has never been ceded. Australian soil, we call this country Australia, but that's a colonial name, and beneath that, this is Aboriginal land, and they say, well, it's never been ceded, and so they don't recognise the Australian Parliament that doesn't acknowledge, that there's never been a treaty. Because there's never been a treaty, they shouldn't have to recognise this colonial government that sort of sits on top of that ancient culture and this ancient land. And they say, there's a lot of arguments there, and I think the chief spokesperson for the Black Sovereignty Movement is Lydia Thorpe, who is a senator, and it's really worth looking at her press. She gave a speech to the National Press Club about 6 or 8 weeks ago, and it's really worth having a listen to that, because she's radical and she's an outsider and she's a polarizing figure, but she does explain this movement very clearly and very compellingly. And essentially, this movement says it's not going far enough. It's not doing it's not doing enough, and they also feel that there might be a legal risk to their sovereignty by being acknowledged in the Constitution. So that's a sort of a really rough sketch of the sort of different, very, very different no positions. And they say that they have a progressive no. They say you can make a progressive no vote. And I think the most important thing to understand about this idea of a progressive no is that there will be no legal recognition of a progressive no. If anybody who writes no on that ballot paper for progressive reasons will support that conservative no. You know, there's no three options in this referendum. There really is just a yes or a no, and so it's super fraught. In that way.
Maybe they need the third option, progressive no, just so they can get an idea of the percentage of people that are saying, I'm not going to vote for this because I want more. You know, maybe that, but they're not going to do it, obviously. But Gav, I know you need to jump off, so do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, well, I think just a couple of things before I go, and thanks for having me, Edo. It's been really awesome. I love you.
I love you
and
too.
good to see you two fine ladies as well. There was we romped up on these shores, 200 odd years ago. We pretty much took what we wanted. We only recognised Aboriginal people, First Nations people were recognised as flora and fauna up to a certain point in our history. I think it was the early 1900s. We finally decided to let Aboriginal people vote in the late 1960s, right? The sky didn't fall in. And this referendum is just another piece in a long, long journey that we have with our First Nations brothers and sisters, hopefully towards something even better, maybe long after I'm gone. It's also, if you want to look at it at a real sort of, Aussie way, it's a mate that's struggled for a long time, and you've now got an opportunity finally to give them a hand. What do you do? At the end of the day, I'm a white fella. It's not really about me. It's about someone. It's about my friend, But if this sort of thing gets up, and we can keep progressing, like I know we can, and I know we will, then ultimately it will help my relatives, my kids, their kids down the track, because there won't be this conflict that I grew up with, or there'll be less. Because happy people and healthy people are productive people, and then we all sort of get on a lot better. So, yeah.
I think there's something really important in that too, about what happens for generations after us. And I think that one thing that the Parliament does not do at all is recognise Aboriginal law, LORE, law. And it doesn't recognise Indigenous ways of knowing, and the way that the sheer knowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have of this country and how to manage the land. And as we go into our environmental future, we are going to need all the help we can get. And I think above and beyond anything else, there is a mechanism to listen more and to integrate that knowledge more into any system. Let's do it, because we have not been listening for too long. And I think it's time that we, as the privileged white people that we are, actually just listened and said, you know what, there are different ways of knowing things, and that's good, and we can incorporate that.
Absolutely.
And generations down the line will benefit from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that forward thinking, I think, is important. But the cynical politics, right? The politicization of everything. like the knowing, you know, if you don't know, don't vote no sort of thing. It's like encouraging ignorance. But the other side of things is we continue to accept that we're being played, right? So I actually personally think that Rupert Murdoch lost the last Australian election. He's pissed off. And a lot of what we're seeing here is him using his power in the media, you know, because you've heard of the whole Atlas Network, this right-wing think tank that's sort of pushing these messages around the world. So everyone's sort of moving, and they're all in the extremist sort of, you know, right ideological. There's left-wing stuff going on as well, of course. But, you know, the cynical politics, this is about people's lives, you know, and that's driving me nuts. You know, most people don't know that Australia's media is basically owned, you know, 70% of it is owned by the Murdoch family, and they're just doing the same old things, dividing, separating. It's been going on for too long. Why do we, I just find it really confusing that we continue to allow them to play games with us. And then the other thing that really annoys me, and I talk about it in lots of different ways, is the demographic split. So I've been looking at the polls and predictions, and older people tend to be more towards no, younger people tend to be more towards yes. People who grow up where we've got boomer generation, Gen X, Gen Y, and millennials, so most of the Western world, right? As a Gen X, we're all Gen X. None of us have more voting power than our parents until 2028. So the last election was the first time that the millennials and the Gen Z, as a collective, equaled the boomer vote, right? So I just think the older people, like you see the media circus around the no vote, and it's older people who are sitting in the audience. It's not that many younger people. And I just really want to encourage the older people to talk to the younger people, because they're not going to be around for the ramifications. The younger people are. So it's their future, you know, and we should be getting behind the kids and saying, we believe in you, that you can make the right decisions. I think, to me, that's a big, I think older people should just say, and I'm happy to put my hand up and not vote. I mean, I'm 53. I'm like, let the kids vote. Let them make the decisions for the future, because we've kind of screwed it up for a long time, you know. So give the kids give the kids a chance. We've never had any power voting, us four, ever.
I've got a tap, ladies. I'm so sorry, but
no,
thanks again.
Take care, Dylan.
But yes.
See you, Gav. Lovely to see you.
Yeah.
I'd like to pick up on a point. Can I pick up on some of those points about the benefits for the rest of us about a yes vote? Because so much of this conversation is about you know, the benefit for Indigenous Australia. But I think there is actually a lot to be said for actually what this can do for the whole country. And I think one of the things that I've seen, I did a big project with an Indigenous community in Western Australia years ago. I was working with young people from refugee and migrant backgrounds, and I noticed that they just didn't have any contact with Indigenous Australia or any sort of sense of it. And so the project was about bringing them in contact with each other, Indigenous young people and newly arrived young people. And one of the extraordinary things about it was that it just shifted these newly arrived young people's sense of what it is to be Australian. And it brought that Aboriginal Australia central in how they understood Australianness. And one of the extraordinary things, and I really experienced it, it was a really, you know, lived experience, like you say, Willie, like of just seeing this extraordinary thing where rather than First Nations Australians being on the outer, being marginalised in our society, it was Indigenous culture centred. And then all of the rest of multicultural Australia actually can find its place. It becomes, and I think there is this sense, you know, some people talk about like white guilt or a sense of discomfort, you know, sense of, in fact, Lydia Thorpe talks about, you know, how non-racist Australians are harder to deal with because they're so full of apology and so uncomfortable about this, living with this gap, knowing that Indigenous Australians are disadvantaged and we are advantaged. We actually benefit from their dispossession. And I think that actually this brings, like, acknowledgement in the Constitution with a voice brings First Nations Australians to the centre of our society, of our culture, acknowledges that central place, and actually allows for everybody else to have a sort of, for a constellation to sort of settle around that. It actually, we are a multicultural nation. We're a very multicultural nation. And in fact, we were a multicultural nation before colonisation. You know, Aboriginal Australia, First Nations, we have many, many, many First Nations. Actually, this was a successful multicultural nation for over 65,000 years.
Yeah.
And we want to become a successful modern nation that has white people and people from all over the world. And I really do think that while it's a symbolic shift for the rest of us, I do think it will be really deep, very, very profound.
Can I add to that too? Something that, I had a discussion with an Aboriginal friend of mine who's a really, really wonderful artist and beautiful friend. And we had this discussion one day because I thought, you know what? When I lived overseas for a long time, whenever I heard a didgeridoo or a yidiki overseas, it was like the umbilical cord only stretches so far. And when you hear a yidiki when you're overseas, it's like you're snapped back. This land is powerful. It's beautiful. It's strong and it's nurturing. And the knowledge to take care of it is so profoundly ingrained in the land itself that is understood by First Nations Australians. And when you grow up here, that energy is yours too. It's there. You can access it. You can learn from First Nations people. And once you open the door just a crack, it opens out to you. It's the most magical, beautiful, amazing thing. I would recommend that everybody reads a book. I will look it up later for you, but there is this amazing book. And I'm having a memory problem this afternoon trying to remember it, but it's all about sort of this Indigenous way of being. And it's a really amazing book that I would recommend anybody read. And I think that coming back to Cymbeline's point about Indigenous Australia being at the centre of a constellation is a beautiful way to put what we've been pushing aside for so long. It's here and it's in us. And I don't think it's until you live overseas, and Edo, you might, be feeling this too.
Yeah.
You don't understand all the tacit knowledge that you have about the power of this place until you're not here anymore. And then when you come back, you're like, ooh, it's magic. It's beautiful. Yeah. And so to actually give a voice to the people who know and tap into and have that intergenerational knowledge of this place, I think is essential for our future. And I agree, Cymbeline, it's not just for First Nations Australians. We get to benefit from that. We get to grow from that. And it's beautiful and it's awesome. And I really hope that people do vote yes. And I understand that treaty is important, and I totally agree. And my hope is that this is a step towards full treaty. That's my hope for this. Yeah,
it's beautiful. I love I mean, hearing a didgeridoo when you're just walking down a street in some random city around the world, and it just if you feel it in your body, right? It's something completely different. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And and we embrace the art and the culture and fashion and all that sort of stuff, but we need to embrace the people. And I think that connection, like you're saying, connection with the magic. We've never allowed ourselves to see the world through those eyes because we've always held on to these traditional sort of cultures that have been brought into the country, and we've forgotten to pay attention to the magic that's already there. And I thought that's really quite a profound observation, my friend.
Absolutely. The Dreaming Path. That's what the book's called.
Okay.
Yeah. It's absolutely sensational. And it is the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Commission is the other term that I also had a memory blank on before, ATSIC. Now I'm getting all my memory back, so that's wonderful.
It's called being female in your 50s, darling. All right, so yeah, it's happened to me too. I don't apologise for it anymore. It is what it is. All right, so we'll start with Cymbeline. What's your message to Australia and Australian voting public right now? There's still pretty large percentage of undecided voters, so I think people are sort of sitting there. They're thinking about it. They're looking at everything. What would you say?
I think it's really important to be having the conversation. The reason that we're going to this referendum is because there was a big process in which that was led by Indigenous people, that had huge consultation that resulted in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and that was addressed to the Australian people, and it asked us to provide a voice, to recognise in the Constitution, a voice enshrined in the Constitution. It is actually, I think, our responsibility, all Australians, to read the Uluru Statement from the Heart. Go back and read it. It is so beautiful. It is so beautiful. It's an invitation, like what Willie was just describing. It's got that depth. It's really like this ancient culture speaking to all of us, and have the conversations, enter into the conversations respectfully, even where it seems, I've had conversations that seemed like there was no room at all for a respectful, and I've found ways, there's always ways to listen. And people who don't know, they have doubts. And if we can listen to those doubts and then really speak from the heart about why we are voting yes, and really address some of the misinformation, and and where you see something you think might be disinformation, look it up. It's so easy to look it up. It's so easy. There's so many fact checks out there. And really enter into the conversation with people that you know and with people that you don't know. And we probably can turn the tide in these 9 days if we do that. If those of us who are voting yes manage to swing one undecided voter each, we could probably pull it over the line.
Yeah. I think the other thing is representation. So understanding the media, that's obviously my background. So there's a concept in the media where they give balance to each side, but it doesn't necessarily give balance based on the percentages. So, the elders who came up with the Uluru Statement, I think there were 112 elders. Does that sound about right? And 20 of them are in the no camp for valid reasons, and I support that. And I think King Charles needs to stand on Australian soil and apologise. Like, that's what they were asking for. You'd kind of wonder, has that conversation with Buckingham Palace, has it been taking place? But that's what they're asking for, so let's give it to them, because we need to be moving forward. But the large majority of the people that are in that tent who came up with that are on the yes side. So the media is not representing the balance there. So I think that's something to be aware of, because it isn't a balanced argument. There's a much higher percentage on looking at it in positive terms. So people don't always think about that. But what about you, Willie? What would you pass on?
Look, I think always get your information from a good source. I did a little troll. I actually got rid of Facebook off my phone for the last 3 weeks because, for different reasons. But I did trawl into YouTube this afternoon and was, yet again horrified by the comments and the stuff, and they're just statements that are made, blah 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 blah, a little bit like that. And so, I mean, it's noise. And so, what I would say is that whatever you can do to cut out the noise is really important. Go to the facts as much as you can, because the noise is really real. And I do think that we have an opportunity here for something that is really, like I said, and to turn if you don't no, vote no thing on its head for a little minute. I remember the first time that somebody told me about Indigenous ways of knowing. And, this comes into when you do doctorates and stuff like that, you talk about, epistemology and ontology and, how we come to knowledge in the world and where does it come from and how do we know that we know and all that sort of stuff. Great philosophical ideas around those things. They're really fun to have. But the first time that somebody said to me, oh, there are Indigenous ways of knowing, and it was actually an Indigenous lecturer at a university I was working at. And I was like, wow, what does she mean? Oh, and I felt my brain go just a little bit because I didn't know what I didn't know. And suddenly a door had opened in my mind. Wow, there are different ways of knowing how to be in the world, how to interpret the world, how to exist with other people in the world. What do you mean? This is awesome. Can you tell me more? That was very exciting for me. And I think that the whole no vote, okay, yes, there are different reasons why people are going on the no campaign and stuff, but I'm really talking about the if you don't know, vote no line. If you don't know, there are so many more things you can know, and that's exciting. But we don't know unless we give a voice to people to actually start contributing to the policies that affect them. And we do end up becoming the beneficiaries of that because a healthier, happier society is a healthier, happier society for everyone in it.
Yeah.
Nothing gets taken away. Everything gets given. And
exactly.
And that for me is why you would want to know.
Yeah. There's no loss for us, right? Okay. So, I just want to add, do the research and know. So it's sort of backing up exactly what you've both been saying. I think that our First Nations people deserve better than ignorance. They've had to suffer that for a long time. It's a step forward. It might not be the final steps we need to make, but I think that they are worth it. They have been traumatized for generations. We've done a lot of harm, and let's take the shame out of it. This is what's happened, and we've got a chance to turn a corner. Let's do it. And I think, and Willie, you've mentioned it as well. Everywhere on this planet needs the wisdom of their Indigenous community to move forward and not suffer climate catastrophe. So this is our chance to bring these people. They actually need to lead us forward if we're going to make it, right? So we're looking at the heat wave. I was saying to Willie before, by February, global warming. So we were at 1.5 warming in June, July, August. In September, it's 1.8 warming. By February, we're going to be at 2.3 warming, which is just disastrous, right? So everyone's aware of this. I know that in Australia, everyone's talking about it. How do you prepare for it? I've done a whole bunch of content on that if you want to do it. But we need this community on our side and helping us. So everywhere on the planet. So let's do the right thing. Pay attention to the money trail. Murdoch, as I said, owns 70% of the Australian media, or influences 70% of the Australian media. And I think he's all over this for whatever the reasons. It's power. It's a power play. And if you're an older voter who you're confused, talk to younger voters. We need them to make these decisions now. We need them to make the decisions for the future of our countries, because they're the ones that are going to face the future. So if you're an older voter and you're on the fence, go and talk to the younger people in your life. I think that's a really a good thing to do. And if you can speak to people from the Indigenous community, go out there and talk to them, listen to them, whether they're yes or no, but just listen to what they got to say. If we're not doing the bare minimum, then we're, that's just lazy. And this is the time for the world where we need to put a lot of work in. All right. So final conclusions, my darlings, and then we'll say goodbye.
Over to you, Cymbeline.
Oh, look, this is just great. What a fantastic thing to do. Like, to me, this is demonstrating how, what this is calling from us, to sit and talk and speak to whoever we can reach, to listen to each other. And ultimately, this is for us each to make our own decision. It really is. It's one of the biggest. I think it's one of the biggest political moments that any of us alive in Australia will live through for Australia. I really do think it's that big.
Yeah, I agree.
If we can get it over the line, it will be that big, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Are you feeling like it will go over the line? I was looking at the stats. It's like 43% no, yes, 49% no, or something like that.
You know what? I just think it's so important I mean, I'm not ignoring the polls. The polls have turned, but I don't know anyone who's been polled, so I don't know what the polls are really doing. I know that there's people analysing all the polls, but this isn't an election. It's not quite the same thing. And I just think that one thing that, I'm trying to come from a slightly different place than a sort of analytic. I'm trying to really engage with the spirit that is sort of, something much deeper, and to maintain that. And I suppose one other last point to make too is that even if it fails, something has been started here that's really important. So that sense of momentum, like what I was saying about wanting to move, like listen to that spirit, wanting to come from that much deeper sort of space, whether the referendum succeeds or fails, there's going to be a lot to do afterwards. And so I really hope that we can maintain the momentum that has come from the positive groundswell, the yes groundswell.
Yeah, let's reach out to King Charles. Get him over.
Yep, I'm all about it. All about it.
Yeah, Will?
I want to take a little moment to acknowledge one of my friends in particular, who I mentioned before, the Indigenous artist and beautiful human being that she is, to acknowledge that for her and for other Indigenous people in Australia, this has not been the politicisation of this issue has had a really detrimental effect on community. And I'd like to just say to all Australians out there now, let's stand behind our Indigenous brothers and sisters, and let's really think about them first and what they need and what this can give them, knowing that it's not perfect, knowing that it's just a start, and knowing that other things will come. But I think that when I hear of my friends who have like literally just like stepping out because the environment is so toxic for them, I want us to be better. And I know we can be better. And I call on all of us to be better.
Yeah. Yeah. As we look ahead, we need a world where people are kind. And I feel like even good people are becoming mean because the world's getting harder and, we've got so many problems and issues. But if we can move towards, operating more from our hearts, and just not allowing those people that want to divide us, because there's power in our division, and we've got to stop allowing it. And they're good at it, and they've been really good at it for a really long time. And we're better than that. So look, I just want to say thank you. Of course we are. Let's be beautiful. Let's be loving. Let's be kind, because that's what the world needs. And if we can come together and put that at the center of how we design our future, we might actually have a chance. But otherwise, we're going to go off the other end, and none of us want that, right? In any way, So thank you both. And Gav,
thank you so much for having us. This has been great. And I agree with Sim. It's just great to more conversation, more good diplomatic conversation.
Yeah. And I appreciate what you guys have been doing on social media, because I know it's not easy, and I know it's been really negative and divisive, and I know it's ugly. I live in the ugly world of social media every day, and not just this conversation, lots of them, and it's hard. So I respect the strength that you guys have shown in staying in the fight. And Dylan's just shared something really great today as well. I don't know if you saw it, just talking about helping a neighbour out. And he was obviously talking about his Aboriginal neighbours and what he can do. And he can vote yes, right? So, let's do it. Let's do the right thing. It's time.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thanks so much, Edo.
Thank you.
Mwah.
See you guys.